And so we went to see the gig, and halfway through, he was playing a song called Reconsider Baby, a Lowell Fulson track. And he said, wait a minute.
Wait a minute, hold it.
We got Led Zeppelin in here tonight. We got to do better than that.
If we could start together, fellas, because we got Led Zeppelin out there, and Jimmy Darren, and a whole bunch of people. And
I was about 9 or something like that, and this voice came across in amongst Pat Boone and Johnny Mathis and all the stuff that was part of the Valium that we still know about today. He got all this stuff, Mystery Train, Junior Parker's Blue Flames. I didn't know anything about the references. I didn't know anything about what I know now, where it came from, but I heard that voice. I was so captured by the emotive stuff. I mean, a lot of the very early Elvis Presley stuff, when you flip the record over, you got some of the most amazing singing. When he was on fire, his voice, he carried all the resonance of black South Tennessee. With Presley mimicking the black voice and bringing a little lift of black music into the mainstream, that was the sort of hors d'oeuvre. And then a little later on, you got all these black American bands who started to permeate.
Yeah. And did Presley influence everybody over there in the 50s?
I would say so, because he was totally unique. I mean, he took a lot of the sort of elements of the Johnny Ray approach, the kind of sobbing voice and that sort of thing. But he mixed it with the music that he was surrounded by when he was a kid in Memphis. You know?
If you listened to Presley and didn't know anything about him, would you know it was a white voice?
I think on some of the very early songs, I wouldn't have known. No.
Wouldn't have known?
No. The stuff which he was taking, the Arthur Crudup music, the That's All Right Mama, Mystery Train, which was Junior Parker's Blue Flames. I mean, the whole deal of Presley was that he was the original hep cat, you know.
Elvis, I was impressed by the whole rebel.
Viva Las Vegas.
No, this is a little bit before that.
Okay.
And I really liked the Presley stance and mood. And I was living in a society that was pretty constricted and pretty tight, you know.
And what we got on the radio in England, it cut through all the drizzle, and it really gave us something that everybody's heads turned. And our parents, as you can imagine, the same thing in America, rejected it wholeheartedly, you know. I mean, there were ports like Liverpool and London where you had merchant seamen landing off boats from the States who bring records, 45s. Yeah. That's why the Beatles were so hip to a lot of the black soul music of the early 60s.
Because it poured into Liverpool.
He was a great-looking guy, and he actually, that physical representation, by the time he got to England, guys were like hitting themselves on the head. Bang, what's going on? Who's this human being? It was fantastic in the middle of all that crap. You know, there was one shining star, and then of course you get exposed to, I mean, Bo Diddley the Man and all that stuff. Yeah. And I was just, as you say, in the dark with my radio. And it wasn't about stardom, and he was not a bad-looking guy, okay, point taken. But the thing is, none of that mattered to a 12-year-old kid. Yeah. You know, what mattered was something was tapping me all the time on the shoulder and saying, where's that coming from, you know?
A lot of rock and roll artists who didn't come across white, clean and neat, you know, the guys who really were rocking, and they were obviously having to be, people were trying to control their power and their youth and their enthusiasm and their recklessness, you know, like Presley, you know. I mean, what happened to Elvis in 5 years was ridiculous, from being a truck driver in 55 to, you know, coming out of the army in 1960. I mean, he'd undergone a complete character change, you know, personality change and everything. But underneath it all, there was still the wild heart. He'd adopted a kid when he was in the forces in Germany in 1959, some sort of pen pal extremity thing, whatever it was. And this kid was a bit younger than the king himself and was into Zeppelin. He was involved with the same agents that we had at the time in the 70s, and he wanted to know who this bunch of guys were who was selling tickets quicker than him. And we wanted to know who we were too. And
And so he played the Forum in LA, and I'd seen him a couple of times. I was really so in awe of him as a singer. And I loved the way he could send himself up, you know. I mean, when you've been doing, we're our one-trick ponies singers generally, and if you can't see the humor in it, and he did.
And we went to see him at the Forum in LA. We were doing a week there, and he was also doing quite a time there. And he wanted to know who this band were who was selling tickets faster than him. And he didn't really have a great deal of perspective on who was doing what, and you know, who Guess Who were or whoever else was happening at the time.
And so we went to see the gig, and halfway through he was playing a song called Reconsider Baby, a Lowell Fulson track. And somebody messed up in the band on the stage, and he stopped the song, because he was the master of his own. He didn't have to do any fancy stuff, he was just doing it. And he said, wait a minute.
Well, hello there. Wait a minute, hold it.
We got Led Zeppelin in here tonight. We got to do better than that.
If we could start together, fellas, because we got Led Zeppelin out there and Jimmy Darren and a whole bunch of people. And
the truth of the matter is, I understand how he could say all that now. Because an artist will spend a lot of time being so sort of almost tense with delivery. But when you get beyond that, you move through onto the next place. That's why Elvis could say stuff like that. He could just stop the whole thing and say, wait a minute, you know, while all this underwear was being thrown at him. And I mean, so I mopped the tears away, and we got the nod that we were going to meet him afterwards. And we went to the hotel, and they had the entire top floor, no motorbikes or snakes. They just had these trestle tables with a couple of big guys. And they ushered us to a suite down the hall. It was a tacky place. It was great. It was all purples and browns, and, you know.
He carried that with him, I believe.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. The room was filling up with sort of second-hand Anne Margarets. There was a lot of.
Well, you know, it has to be said. A second-hand Anne Margaret is
Nothing
still.
wrong with that.
You know.
It was one of those long suites where a door opens into another door, like Get Smart or whatever it is, just on and on and on. You know, and the whole place was full of Sandra Dee, sort of Stella Stevens kind of, which is perfect for me. You know. A pencil skirt and a beehive, and I've gone from some white stilettos. Shows your age, doesn't it?
But he had a lot of chicks. So he got something going on, but
So you had that in common with Elvis. A lot of tricks.
Great experience, because we got into his suite, which slowly filled up with people, and the door at the end of the suite kept opening, and a head kept popping around, just to see how this kind of situation was doing. Were there enough people in yet to make the great entrance? Obviously there weren't for a while, so we mumbled and looked around to see if there was anything to steal and stuff. And eventually the door opened when there was just that right capacity. Perhaps the fire chief had been around and decided it was okay. And the king came in, you know.
And then the door opened, and this guy came through the door, and I jumped in. Whoa! Look at the way he moves, and I mean, he was just going around chairs like. He was so cool, and I mean, of course, he wasn't supposed to be cool, but he was.
And it was a bit like seeing Princess Margaret at a sort of at the Chelsea Flower Show. For a while, he was sort of. And then he came round to us, and we stood and talked for about an hour and a half, and we had the funniest time. He was so wacky, his sense of humour was great.
And he came over to us, and we stood in a circle for about 2 or 3 hours talking, and people kept coming by from his retinue, from his entourage, thinking that he'd had enough. And he was going, no. And we had a great conversation. And our manager, Led Zeppelin manager Peter Grant, is sort of quite well known as probably as much as John Paul Jones. You know, big guy, very great presence about him. And Peter was just going past us on the way to taking a seat somewhere in the homage area.
The second circle.
That's right, yeah. And he lost his footing a bit like our friend there, and he 350 pounds of joy ended up on Vernon Presley's lap. And Elvis's dad was really frail, with a white safari top.
Well, first of all, he didn't take himself at all seriously. And that was the great thing. So, you know, you would think that when you meet somebody who's such a deity as that, you're going to have to negotiate an ego and all the stuff that I'm used to in the game.
Yeah.
But he was really interested to meet us because he knew that despite the kind of swagger of Led Zeppelin, the deal was that we were and remain in many respects huge music fans.
Well, what are you guys, what's your music roots? And we all got the same roots, you know. There's sort of blues out of Memphis and Mississippi and stuff. And he said, well, you know, do you do a lot of rehearsals? And of course, Led Zeppelin didn't really show up until the gig was almost over before we actually arrived in those days. And so we didn't do many sound checks, but when we did, I used to like to sing in those big arenas his songs because they sounded even bigger. I collect records by Elvis impersonators, and I've got the entire collection of Raul Donna tracks. And he was a guy out of New York, an Italian, who had some hits in the early 60s. And I asked him how he felt about that, just like people ask me how I feel about guys who sound like me, you know? Except he was the king and I'm not. So I asked him about Raul Donna, and I told him I got all Raul's records. And he said one day he was in New York and this big limousine came down the street in the village, and he turned and Elvis was walking down the street, and he turned and looked in the car, and in the back window it said, "This car belongs to the real Raul Donna," which I thought was great.
Well, he knew that you can't ever take it seriously about other people, the hysterical impression of fame and where it takes you. So you can become a prisoner of that. And sadly, he was a prisoner of that.
Did he know that?
Yes, he knew that, and he had no way out.
You've escaped from it.
Yeah, but I was never a big cheese like that. I mean, I was just part of a big cheese.
And we talked with Presley for about three hours. It just went on, and we were talking about the root. And your question about where did it come from? It came from him, and he still got it. He still was into that whole Delta thing. He, you know, good rocking tonight, all that stuff that got him going in the first place. But he also knew, and he had a great sense of humor, and he knew that he was locked in this self-parody. I mean,
and he said to me, "Yeah, well, which song do you sing?" And I said, "Any Way You Want Me." You know, and as I was leaving the place about an hour later, I was walking down the corridor, and we were all going, "What a great guy! Wow!" Really charged up, like shaking with happiness, really, at having met a guy who really was happening. You know, despite everything that everybody says, and even now that they write. At that point in time, he was everything that he should have been, you know. And he called, and I turned around. I was about 10 doors down the corridor, and he started singing to me the beginning of the song. And then he put his hand like that, and he said, "And you?" And I sang back to him. And the pair of us, two silly singers, singing away in this Holiday Inn.
when the songs dried up, when Lieber and Stoller and Pomus and Schumann, when that kind of whole era of creative writing started to wane and things changed, I didn't want to hear Elvis doing a Neil Diamond song. I wanted him, I mean, it was bad enough him coming out of the army and doing Are You Lonesome Tonight, you know. I wanted him to stay wild, to give me all those edges, that kind of, that howl that he had. But, you know, he was just amazing and spectacular, and it was just, it's great. So it was a dream come true to meet him, but it was also just by chance that I heard him, and it affected me the way it did.
I'm so glad that when I did meet him eventually that I wasn't let down, you know? Because, I mean, you could meet people backstage, people go, "Hi, how you doing? Okay, how great." You can't exude this kind of wild whatever it is that people have been dreaming of, but Presley had it. And when I was a kid, I didn't want the kind of pop crap, you know, or whatever it was. I wanted that other thing. And even though Presley became a pop puppet, he really still carried the flag, no matter what anybody says. Because when I met him, he'd still got the flag.
Yeah.